Welcome to Count Me In. I'm your host, Adam Larson, and today I'm joined by Chandelle Fastiggi, Head of Finance Services Vertical at Manpower. Together, we'll dive into the complexities of today's financial services industry, including how institutions are tackling regulatory shifts, cybersecurity threats, and the rapid evolution of AI and automation. With over 25 years in the business, Chandelle shares her expert insights on the importance of upskilling talent, adapting to economic change, and building strong data governance strategies. So, whether you're leading a team or planning your next career move, this episode is packed with practical ideas to help you stay ahead in these unpredictable times. Let's jump right in. Chandelle, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We're very excited to have you today. And we're going to be talking about a number of different things, but I kind of figure where we could start is maybe you could start by describing like the current economic and political climate, especially in financial services. And I'm sure that's causing different pressures or it's causing different pressures on institutions because of those pressures.
Yes, absolutely. I would say overall, the financial services industry is cautiously optimistic right now, but also, very transformative at the same time. Not letting that get too much in the way. But I think it's very interesting had we met, in early 2025, to now, maybe, the topic would be a little bit different. But there absolutely is growth going on in the financial services industry. It is slated to grow by 25% between now and 2028 to 45 trillion. So while it may seem, tight and slow and sometimes doom and gloom out there, there's a lot of positivity. And, there are a few key things that financial institutions have to keep in mind, when the economic climate or political climate changes. And, right now we're seeing interest rates fall, right? So when interest rates fall, obviously that impacts financial institutions because they're not, getting that, money coming into the organization. And then you see high deposits they're having to pay out, to their clients for that. And so that does definitely, impact their bottom line or compress their margins. But along with that, we went into 2025 thinking that, regulation was still going to be very much a thing. And, organizations obviously always have to allot money, to cover those costs that may come, at any point in time, right? Risk regulatory issues arise, at any point in time, and you have to respond. And so with that, deregulation also opens up, some of the funding and their ability to, invest in other ways. The other piece, that's big right now is cyber threats. We have, North Korea threats. They're infiltrating many of our, enterprise organizations throughout the US within financial services and outside. And, putting hackers in place to act as recruiters, act as developers, so banks are having to make investments, to mitigate that risk. And then the other piece I would say is, in regards to fraud, that's obviously still something, that is very rampant out there, especially with the implementation of AI. I think personally this week I had 3 text messages from 3 different type of environments, I guess you could say, trying to get me to engage and potentially, bring fraud into my life. So I just think that as, economic and political climates change, I mean, banks just always, have to stay on top of that, be ready for it, but also, be able to pivot quickly where they need to, either to support it or to maybe reinvest what they thought they were going to have to invest, in regards to the climate.
Yeah, the climate is constantly changing. You have to constantly keep your finger on what's happening and all the things that you were saying of how institutions have to constantly kind of ride the waves almost.
Hmm.
And are those waves what causes financial institutions to kind of begin transformation journeys, especially in these environments? Like with all the different threats, there's constantly new technologies. There's so many new things that you have to be on top of and be ready for. You can't just say, "Well, we have a nice website and that's it." Like that's no longer the status quo.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think absolutely those pieces are a part of what a financial institution needs to be aware of and focused on and ready to invest in at any point in time. But I would say, just in my 25 years of being in this industry, there's a few things that are consistent, that they want to be able to make investments in or have to make investments in. Obviously, risk regulatory, like I said earlier, they can't say no to that. Secondly, is core banking systems. They're always looking at, which ones do we need to modernize? Why do we need to modernize them? How do we need to modernize them? And what impacts is that going to make, to the overall organization and to our customers? And then lastly is they're always customer focused, right? There are tons of financial institutions out there that can meet all the different, needs of an individual or a company. And so being able to really hone in on what areas are we going to invest in that are truly going to attract and retain talent. I mean, to retain talent, you can tell them in the staffing and retain customers for the long term for their organization.
Well, let's talk a bit about that
Mhm,
retaining that top talent, because that's a thing all business owners are kind of really trying to grapple with in this ever
mhm.
changing environment. What is the approach that organizations should take to upskilling and reskilling their people, so that actually they're meeting the demands, but also making sure they're not saying, "Well, you're not staying up with us to date. I'm getting out of here." Like, you want to keep those people and make them a better value for the organization.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics right now because I really don't know and that the financial services industry has figured it out at scale. Definitely a ton of great stories out there, and I'll share some of those. But um historically, financial institutions, have typically looked at their workforce and said, okay, we don't need these type of resources anymore for whatever reason, it may be. And, they lay off those resources and then they go hire resources, in the areas they do. Because 75% of companies, in hiring managers today do not feel confident that they have the skills and resources needed to progress the organization. Now more than ever, upskilling and reskilling is going to be very important because you may have some great resources that are sitting in another area of the organization. And so when I think of the future, within this area and with the workforce, it's so important that it's an enterprise wide initiative and it's not being siloed into, consumer banking or finance or commercial banking, or technology, but really at the top saying, we are going to make a decision here, as an organization, and we're going to have finance aligned, technology aligned, our business lines aligned, HR and TA in the conversation. And how can we ensure that we really truly retain the talent that we believe we can upskill and reskill and fit the organization and don't lose all that institutional knowledge. That's another thing that I think is really important is somebody may have been in your company, for 15, 20 years and has a ton of institutional knowledge that's very valuable to being a part of, future transformation and just, releasing them and bringing somebody in from the outside, isn't always the answer. Sometimes it is the answer.
Mhm.
So, a couple examples I would say, I mean, just one right now we're working on with one of our clients is we have, an executive that's going to be having a number of resources moved over to his organization. He's unsure, that they fit and have the behavioral and technical skills for where he wants to take the organization. But they're partnering with us to say, okay, let's first assess the talent. So let's take them through some testing. And then once we assess them, let's figure out the individuals that we believe have, the aptitude, or the skills for the new environment. What upskilling or reskilling, can we do to keep them in the organization and position them, for more opportunity with us. Another area you're seeing a lot of partnerships for upskilling and reskilling is a lot of the larger banks are partnering with HBCUs and community colleges. And we're seeing the amount of hires in that space continue to rise. One of them, I think last year, had over 4,000 hires through that. So, it's really encouraging to see that knowing that we may not have the skills within the organization or they may not be readily available out there in the marketplace, that companies are getting creative on how they can acquire that talent.
I think that's amazing, being able to connect with colleges and say, "Hey, you're coming out of college. You all that knowledge is super fresh. Why don't you come apply it right now?" And being able to have that pipeline is a great way to get new talent, get that fresh blood in there, but also like start people off and start with a great foundation. I think that's a great way to kind of connect with the next generation of employees.
Well, and it's funny you say that because I think back to when I first moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, big banking city, and you would see all these groups of young people walking around downtown Charlotte together. And I didn't come from the financial services. I didn't have that type of degree, right? I just got into this through the recruiting industry. And I would see them and be like, what are this? What are these people? Like they're all together. They're like kind of in little clans. And they were interns, right? But they were interns that were hired for the investment bank. They weren't interns hired for, many other areas of the organization. And so it's really cool to see now that, a lot of variety of, individuals in a college, can benefit and not just ones that are in a specific domain, or piece of the business. So I would have loved to have had that when I was in college, right? I got out of college and I had no clue what I was going to do and ended up in this lovely industry. But I think that's really exciting to see that, underserved or even just individuals that didn't take, a route maybe that others took still have that opportunity.
Do you think that with the ever-changing environment, that it kind of causes people to pause about going into the industry with, with the, with all the different short-term economic uncertainty, you're not sure what's happening, like, "Well, I don't wanna go in there, it might not things might change so much that I might be out of a job in a year." Do you think that pauses people from going in that industry?
I think it can. I mean, I think in general, there's a lot of that going on, right? Within the financial services industry and all around right now, there's so much uncertainty, right? What is the right
Yeah.
job? What is the right career? I mean, what is going to be around in, 5, 10, 15 years? Will this job be replaced? That's I think in general, everybody's feeling that way. That being said, specific, to what you're asking, we're seeing, right? I mean, there's a lot out there right now around people making bold stances against the industry.
Mhm.
We're seeing, a lot of political concerns, social concerns with the rise of social media and just, I mean, it continues to be more and more prevalent and people have such a platform all the time, right? To
Mhm.
share their ideas. I think being able to muddle through that and really figure out, what is real, what is, something to be concerned about, or what is just somebody's opinion could, confuse people. And I think too, just purely, like you're saying, like understanding like the direction that they're going. Right? Developers even, right? I mean, in the past, everybody thought, hey, if you want to get into development, go into financial services. There's endless jobs, right? Well, now AI is being implemented in, many cases, within the development organizations. And there's still a need for developers, more a need for
Yeah.
architects, maybe than entry level developers. But I look at it as an opportunity. Whereas in the past, you had to have those skills to even get that entry level job. Well, now the entry level jobs can be performed by AI. So you almost get the opportunity to enter into an organization, maybe at even a little bit higher level and utilize different skills, but still take on that experience and training you got, within the development space.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just thinking, like, I gotta ask her, how is AI and automation affecting this industry? Because we keep having these conversations, and every industry it's affecting it in different ways. And I figure, when it comes to the financial services, how is AI and automation kind of affecting it, making those impact? You already said, like, developers and certain jobs, like
Mhm.
you have to like AI is taking over those initial jobs, and there's so many new things out. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, one that is relevant, I think, to this organization is obviously CFO organizations and finance organizations, right? And how is AI being implemented there? And we just recently supported a transformation within a CFO line of business at, one of the top 5 banks. And basically, they were looking at how do we, gather our data faster, report faster, provide information to executive level resources, faster, as these things pivot and change, right? Like, okay, 2025 starts out and, the organization has a specific plan and strategy in place and things change. I mean, money and funds move all the time in financial services. We'll have a project we have funding for and we lose it the next day, right? But in general, there are needs to pivot and be more agile and fluid, within the finance organization and within the overall organization. And so finance organizations have had to look at their core banking, finance applications and say, okay, what do we need to do to better structure our data, make it more accurate so that we can report faster as things pivot, and you get that call and somebody says, hey, I'm getting ready to walk into a meeting and I need you to provide me this data. And in the past, it might have been like, I need like 2 days to do that. I can't pull that together for you in the next 30 minutes. But now, because of automation, within the organization, they're able to pull a lot of that reporting. And so their jobs are changing. The accountant individual that used to sit behind a desk and crunch numbers and send it out, like they now a lot of times are sitting in those meetings. And, a part of, talking about that, the financials and talking about their reports and presenting because they didn't have to spend as much time crunching the numbers. So it's just like a more active role now. That's one piece, right? The other areas that we're seeing is customer service implemented over the last 5, 10 years in some capacities within call centers, right? To have higher call resolution on the first call. And we've had AI implemented, through chatbots to support IT support questions, right? That you don't have to necessarily get on a call, to support. We're seeing it on the customer side very much. We have prompts now when we go to our mobile application, that help us get through things faster. I think about just when depositing a check is easier. I think about when I'm asked to give my credit card when I'm paying for something online. Now I can take a picture, of the number and it puts it in there for me. I mean, there's just a lot of things like that that are being implemented that are just making us be able to work so much faster. And listen, the faster we can get our deposits in or the faster we can pay our bills, the quicker they get what they need. So it's just overall, we're seeing it implemented. And, again, a lot of it there, I mean, there are areas that are absolutely implementing it and have been, and it's fully operational, right? Another area that I think of is trading operations. I
Hmm.
mean, we're able to move a lot faster in that space now. Fraud is another area that you can, move a lot faster and catch fraud, much faster. But overall, there's still so many use cases out there right now to figure out really and truly where is the right place to invest and that is going to impact our business versus just be the next cool thing, whether it's internal or putting it out to market.
So, with all those things that you're mentioning, all those data points, all of that data is living in a cloud, in a data center somewhere. And that increases your risk, that increases your governance, that you have to keep in track of those things. What are some considerations that we have to keep in mind as we're looking at all that stuff? And because, if we believe the hackers are just like clickety, clackety, clickety, I'm in, I've got their data. Is it that simple? Like, there's so many considerations now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, cyber's everything, right? I mean, having investments for cyber. So, as we're talking about transforming an organization, within financial services, like I think of the glitzy pieces and the glamorous side, right? As a consumer, like what are you giving me that's going to benefit me personally? But while they are still investing in a lot of those areas to continue to attract and retain customers, at the same time, a lot of the transformation is going on in that cyber space, in the data center space, in the cloud space, which are the ones that nobody sees, but are super, super impactful to me as, a customer. So when I think of, cyber security and like you said, how easy it is for these hackers, to get in. I mean, financial institutions hire hackers, which was the craziest thing to me when I learned that years ago. I took a client out to dinner and we're sitting at dinner and he's telling me like the type of resource that he needs, for this project he has coming up. And I'm sitting there thinking, I swear he's talking about a hacker, right? And
Ethical
so
hacking, right? They call it
yeah,
ethical hacking. Yeah.
exactly. And I was finally said, "Are do you need me to hire you a hacker?" And he said, "Absolutely. That's what I'm asking, but an ethical one, right?" And I said, "Oh my gosh, this is so wild." And so it's even more of a thing, now in the hacker, the ethical hacker of the past, like what they have to, have knowledge of and experience of now versus, in the past. And so I just think that, organizations, like I mentioned earlier, like at the enterprise level, they really have to pick those things that are going to, impact the broader organization, the broader customer base, and where can we, invest and transform in those areas, but also still continue to bring great products to the market that are going to drive, revenue and growth and positive net income, all those things.
Do you think that all these new technologies and all these new things that we have to take account for are organizations having to shift where their budgets are going because you have an increased cost from all these technology things. Are we having to cut elsewhere to balance that out?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a couple different ways they're doing it, but the answer is yes. So when I think of a specific example, right? Like one of our customers has a $13 billion technology budget, and they want to implement AI in their organization, right? They can't just go ask for more money, so they have to look at their technology budget and say, okay, you know, this modernization we were thinking about doing over here, it's not that important, or it's not really going to move the needle. It's one that like would be nice to have, or maybe there are some applications they want to modernize, but some of them are tied to revenue generating versus non-revenue generating. And so, they wanted to find $4 billion to put towards AI of that 13 billion. And so, I mean, think of how many projects have to be cut to find
Yeah.
$4 billion. The other area that we see, and this is the unfortunate one, is layoffs. I mean, cutting SG&A cost. And so right now, going kind of back to the upskilling and reskilling, a lot of times there's like, this is just easier. And I hate to say easier when we're talking about people's livelihood, and it causes a lot of stress. But at the same time, that is, an easy way. Our industry is an easy way to cut costs, right? You have 500 contractors, okay, cut 200 of them. You've got more money, right? So
Yeah.
we definitely see shifting of, priorities, projects, initiatives, people all go in to that equation for them to really be able to find those investment dollars that they want to spend.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to like you were saying, goes back to our conversation about reskilling and upskilling. It's more important now than ever as employees to say, okay, what knowledge can I consume? How can I make myself more valuable and say, hey, well, we're adding this new technology and say, raise your hand and say, yep, I already know about it. Let me get in there and do that. And so it's like it's more important now, like not even just as leaders, but if you're just in an organization and you see that's just where they're going, make sure you're getting yourself upskilled, learn the new thing, get yourself in there, get your feet wet. You can't just sit around and expect your organization to train you for everything.
Yeah, the days of learning and development building everything for us and hosting the training or having in person or virtual or online. I mean, yes, those tools are still there, but owning your learning journey is more critical now than ever. Companies are allowing for that time in your day, which I think is really awesome. That you're being told like you need to invest a certain amount of your day in continuous learning that you do on your own, teaching yourself AI and ChatGPT, Copilot, all the different tools and why different ones are better than others and how can you incorporate them into your day. I mean, I personally do trial and error, sometimes, and I keep some of the things and they make my day better and help me work faster and more efficiently. And other things I'm like, nah, that was a complete waste of time. Like I could have done that faster myself, right? So,
Yeah.
and you have to teach it too. I mean, these tools learn us. They learn the way you talk, the way they learn the, way you ask questions. They learn what's important to you. I mean, it's literally crazy when you think about a relationship, with technology versus a relationship with a person and how, even just you and I getting to know each other, right? I mean, the more we get to know each other, we just interact better together. And so
Yeah.
it's very much that same way, with the tools that are out there today. So I just think, you know, internal mobility, yes, it needs to be a strategy at that enterprise level of a company. And in
Mhm.
many companies, it is. I mean, at one of the top five banks, 12,000 employees were internally mobilized in 2024. I mean, that's massive and that's huge for those individuals, but also making yourself attractive to be moved, internally, I think is key and really making it known to people the skills that you've been acquiring and how you've been acquiring them.
Definitely, and I think that's more important than ever, like, organizations that are the thought leaders, getting connected with your local professional body, like selfless plug, like the Institute of Management Accountants, like, or
Mhm.
any other body that has to do with your industry that you're connected with. Make sure that you're connecting with those bodies to get that knowledge, to get that thing outside of your organization and be able to connect with other professionals. So that way you're staying up. Because if you talk to another professional and you're like, oh wait, you're dealing with the same issue. How are you dealing with it? Well, this is how we're dealing, and you learn so much in those moments of interaction. And that's why it's so super important to get involved.
I love that you just said that because yesterday I was stuck at the airport for a little bit and I was in the Delta Lounge and I overheard these 2 men talking because it was really quiet in there. And I mean, they were talking kind of loud and I just started listening and, I was Googling things as they were talking and, just like trying to figure out what industry they were in because obviously I'm in the recruiting industry. So I was curious what they do for a living. But also, just listening to the topics that are top of mind for other people. And I could tell they were executives. And so it's just very interesting how you can, enhance your learning in so many different capacities.
So somebody's listening to this conversation. We've covered a lot of different things, especially with organizations and getting them ready for their next transformation. Maybe we can finish our conversation with, like, somebody's listening to this. They're like, I really want to do this, but what's the first step? What's my next step if I want to bring my organization to this transformation that we've been discussing?
So I definitely think you got to establish a very clear strategic vision at the top. Right? And one of the things just kind of going back to the beginning of our conversation, good governance is good business. It always will be. No matter what is going on in the economy or politically, financial institutions know what good business looks like and they know what good governance looks like. And if organizations, want to stay ahead and whether it's the government that comes after them or the news that comes after them. If they want to avoid that, the best thing to do is establish that clear vision. And, when you are rolling it out, you have to think of that vision uniquely with every group that's going to be implementing it, right? If you just like AI, right? At the top. The CEO has stated that they want to implement AI in the organization. You can burn through a lot of money real fast. That 13 billion can get blown overnight if there's not a strategic vision, at the top, but then rolled out effectively to every line of business because, you know, the top 5 banks have 200,000 plus employees. That's a lot of people to manage a message to. I think back to being a kid and at lunch we'd play the telephone game. The message at the end was nowhere near the message that we started with. I think some people had fun with it, right? But
Of course.
getting that to translate all the way down is really critical. Then the second piece is considering that good governance is good business. And how are we not only going to implement this, but ensure that all those checks and balances are in place from a cyber perspective, a fraud perspective? How are we really going to ensure that all that is in place so that the areas we are choosing to invest in are going to make an impact and also keep us, at less risk? So, data, I mean, that's a huge piece of an effective transformation, especially when you're, referring to AI. But before AI was ever around, one of my top clients went through a massive data transformation solely to get their core banking platforms to speak better together, right? So, having good data is not a new thing. It's just way more important, I think, now maybe than it was in the past because we're expecting a machine to learn how to communicate, the data throughout all the systems. And obviously now, spit out reporting and ideas and, investment, planning, all types of things. And so, then it's once you roll all that out, what are your checks and balances to make sure that it's working and that we catch that bad investment if we did one. Because, listen, none of us are perfect, right? And so, we could have something that we're going down a path with, and how are we going to, check and balance that? The other thing that comes to mind, and it brings me back to like kind of the role of the finance organization and the CFO in the past, you know, they had the budget, kind of reported on it probably on a monthly, quarterly basis. But now they're sitting at the table, right? So when that strategic vision is built, finance organizations are sitting there alongside, the C-level executives that run the business or technology, and they're a part of that conversation and looking at, where we can move those investments around or areas that may be more beneficial for us to make investments in, as well as more of that real time, whoa, 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 this is slipping, right? Like we're starting to just burn through this. So it's just a lot of it really boils down to the clear vision and then the right governance around it.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Chandelle, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast, sharing your knowledge with our audience. Like I've learned a lot. I hope they've learned a lot, and hope we can continue the conversation online. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Adam. Have a great rest of the day, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
This has been Count Me In, IMA's podcast, providing you with the latest perspectives of thought leaders from the accounting and finance profession. If you like what you heard and you'd like to be counted in for more relevant accounting and finance education, visit IMA's website at www.imanet.org.